What price did a man pay to be chosen for the Sultan's inner court? It was not measured in gold or jewels, but in silence, in suffering, and in blood. Inside the towering walls of the Topkapi Palace, where sunlight struck domes of marble and mosaics glimmered like stars, there existed a world that outsiders could never truly see. A world where beauty itself became a weapon, and desire could turn into a sentence of death. The male concubines of the Ottoman emperors were not free men. They were boys stolen from distant provinces, torn from their families, stripped of their names and faith. Once inside the palace, they belonged to the Sultan alone, bound not by chains of iron, but by fear, secrecy, and absolute submission. Within those walls, whispers carried more weight than screams. Some were remade through mutilation, their bodies altered forever to serve the empire's will. Others were forced into humiliations that erased their dignity piece by piece. And for those who became too dangerous, too bold, or simply too unlucky, death came quietly, in the shadows of the harem, in the silence of a strangler's cord, or beneath the waters of the Bosphorus. To be chosen by the Sultan was not a gift. It was both a blessing and a curse that could end in blood. The Ottoman harem was never simply a chamber of pleasure. It was a fortress of power, an institution designed not only to serve the Sultan's desires, but to reinforce his absolute dominion over every life that entered its gates. Hidden within the walls of the Topkapi Palace, the harem was a world apart, a place where politics, intrigue, and fear were woven into daily existence. When most hear the word harem, they imagine silken rooms filled with women. But this vision is only half the truth. The harem was also home to boys, male concubines, drawn into a system as cruel as it was secretive. Their presence was not spoken of openly, yet they were integral to the palace's hidden machinery of control. Many of these boys were taken through the Devshirme system, a levy on Christian populations across the empire. Others were captured during wars or purchased from slave markets. Once seized, they were cut off from everything they had known, their families, their languages, their gods. They were forced to convert to Islam and raised in isolation, taught that their past lives no longer existed. Inside the palace, every moment was dictated by hierarchy. At the very top stood the Sultan, whose whims shaped life and death. Below him, the eunuchs ruled the harem. These eunuchs, some black, some white, were themselves victims of castration, turned into instruments of surveillance and punishment. They were the gatekeepers, the watchers, the executioners. To be a concubine was to embody submission itself. The Sultan's control reached deeper than the body. It extended into the very soul. Obedience was demanded not through choice, but through fear, humiliation, and ritualized violence. But once chosen for the Sultan's inner court, the boys faced punishment so cruel, their silence still echoes through history. For many, the path into the Sultan's inner world began not with silk or splendor, but with a blade. Castration was the dividing line between boyhood and servitude. It was the ritual that marked the body forever, stripping away not only flesh, but the very essence of manhood. The procedure was carried out in secrecy, often by slave traders or palace physicians. It was brutal, unclean, and often fatal. Young boys, some barely on the edge of adolescence, were taken aside and subjected to surgery without mercy. Sometimes only the testicles were removed. Other times, in full castration, the entire organ was severed. The wounds were cauterized crudely or left to fester. Infection was common. Fever consumed many. Some bled to death within hours, their bodies discarded as failures. Historians estimate that perhaps 1 in 10 boys survived the ordeal. Those who lived were never the same. The French ambassador, Ogier Ghiselin de Busbecq, who witnessed the Ottoman court in the 16th century, wrote of the hollow-eyed eunuchs who patrolled the palace halls, silent, withdrawn, their very presence a reminder of what had been taken from them. They were not men, nor entirely boys. They were something in between, shadows molded for service. Psychologically, the wound ran deeper than flesh. These boys were robbed of the chance to ever father children, to pass on a name, to leave behind a legacy. Their lineage ended before it began. Their bodies became tools of the empire, their futures erased with the stroke of a knife. For the Ottomans, this was precisely the point. Castration severed not only desire but bloodline, making them eternally bound to the Sultan. With no sons, no wives, no heirs, their only loyalty could be to the throne. And so the eunuchs became living symbols of imperial control, proof that the Sultan's power reached into the most intimate, sacred parts of human life. They walked the halls as reminders to all who saw them. The Sultan was master not only of nations, but of flesh, of blood, of destiny itself. Yet even survival brought no safety, for the Sultan's affection was never permanent. Favor could turn to cruelty in a heartbeat. The boy who once caught the emperor's eye could, with the slightest suspicion, be stripped, beaten, or condemned to silence forever. Surviving the blade was only the beginning, because the emperor's whims could turn affection into torment. Inside the Topkapi Palace, survival was never enough. The male concubines who endured castration soon discovered that the Sultan's favor was a performance they were forced to play each day. Their bodies became instruments of spectacle, their dignity reduced to entertainment. Concubines were dressed in ornate silks and jewels, paraded before the court like living trophies. During feasts, some were commanded to dance, their movements scrutinized by the Sultan and his guests. Others were ordered to sing or recite verses, their voices echoing through gilded chambers heavy with incense and torchlight. What to the outsider might have seemed like a display of grace was, in truth, a theater of humiliation. These boys did not perform willingly. They performed because refusal meant punishment. Rivalries thrived in this suffocating atmosphere. Each concubine sought to hold the Sultan's gaze a little longer, to win a passing word of approval, to secure scraps of safety. But envy corroded what little solidarity might have existed. Whispers spread like poison. Informants lurked in every corner. A concubine who rose too high could be betrayed by another desperate for survival. Sometimes a boy disappeared overnight, his body never seen again, his name never spoken. For those who disobeyed or simply failed to amuse, punishments were cruelly inventive. Some were stripped naked and beaten in front of others, their pain made into a warning. Others were starved, confined to dark chambers for weeks until their bodies trembled on the edge of collapse. A few were forced to crawl before the Sultan's feet, reduced to little more than animals for the court's amusement. Foreign ambassadors recorded scenes that left them disturbed. Concubines mocked, degraded, paraded like slaves in chains. While courtiers laughed at their suffering, such humiliation was not random cruelty, it was a system. Every act stripped away another layer of dignity, leaving the victims hollow, obedient and broken. The meaning was clear. In the Ottoman Harem, the Sultan's authority was absolute. Even beauty, the very quality that had secured their place, was turned against them. What had once been their shield became the weapon of their destruction, but humiliation was only the beginning. Because when concubines were no longer entertaining, or when they were suspected of betrayal, the punishment was not shame, it was death. In the Ottoman palace, death rarely came with thunder or spectacle. It came quietly, in whispers and shadows, carried out not in public squares, but behind locked doors. For the male concubines who lost the Sultan's favor, or who were merely suspected of betrayal, execution was swift, silent, and merciless. The method most often used was strangulation. A silk cord, strong yet smooth, was wrapped around the victim's neck. Two executioners would pull in opposite directions until breath and life were gone. Silk was not chosen for softness, but for symbolism. The Sultan's blood could not be spilled, and neither could the blood of those close to him. Death had to be clean, discreet, invisible. No mark of violence was to stain the empire's grandeur. Others met their end in the dark waters of the Bosphorus. Concubines accused of disloyalty were placed in sacks, weighted down, and cast into the current. The river became their grave, swallowing them whole, leaving no body, no burial, no name etched in stone. They were erased as though they had never existed. History whispers of concubines entangled in palace intrigues, those suspected of aiding the valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, or the Haseki, his favorite consort. Even the hint of conspiracy was enough to seal a boy's fate. Evidence was rarely required. Suspicion was a death sentence. The atmosphere within the harem was thick with dread. Concubines lived each day knowing a glance could condemn them, a rumor could destroy them, and the Sultan's silence could be more terrifying than his wrath. One moment of favor could vanish into a lifetime of fear. The symbolism was devastating. Even beauty, the very gift that had brought them into the palace, was disposable. To the empire, their bodies were tools. Once broken, once inconvenient, they were discarded without hesitation. Life and death balanced on the razor's edge of desire. And yet, for many, the cruelest fate was not execution. Death at least offered release from the endless performance of obedience. The harsher punishment was survival. Endless years trapped in the palace, shadows fading into obscurity, their lives stretched into living death. Because within the gilded cage of the Ottoman Harem, death was not always the worst fate. Sometimes survival was. For those concubines who escaped the Silk Cord or the Bosphorus, survival did not mean freedom. Instead, it meant a slower, quieter torment, one that stretched across years, until their lives resembled little more than shadows. Aging concubines were of no use to the Sultan. Beauty faded, youth withered, and with it went whatever protection or favor they had once enjoyed. No longer sought after, they became prisoners of routine, condemned to wander the palace corridors in silence. Some were reduced to servants, pouring water, sweeping marble floors, carrying trays for men and women who once treated them as little more than ornaments. Others were locked into deeper forms of captivity, confined to backrooms where time itself became a punishment. Trust became impossible in these years of decline. Many concubines, desperate to hold on to some fragment of usefulness, became spies and informants. They listened for whispers, reported on rivals, and betrayed former companions just to survive another day. Brotherhood was shattered, friendship dissolved into suspicion. In the palace, betrayal was not a choice, it was a necessity. The walls of Topkapi became a gilded tomb. Outside, the city of Istanbul moved with life and freedom, but inside, the concubines lingered in a world where escape was unthinkable. They had no families to return to. Their names, their languages, their faith, all had been erased long ago. They had no children, no heirs, no legacies. The only life they had was the one the Sultan permitted them to have. This endless captivity was perhaps the cruelest punishment of all. Death was final, but survival was a wound that never healed. Each day reminded them of what they had lost, and each night closed with the knowledge that they would never again live outside those walls. Symbolically, they were the embodiment of the empire's hidden cruelty. The Ottoman court dazzled outsiders with its splendor, gold, jewels, silks, and feasts. But behind those glittering illusions lay human lives caged, broken, and erased. The male concubine's existence was not about love or intimacy. It was about domination. It was about showing that the Sultan's power had no limits, not even over the most private corners of the human soul. And so they remained, breathing, but already dead, living in silence, their stories buried under centuries of shame. Even today, their voices remain half-buried, because shame, not memory, was their legacy. The story of the male concubines of the Ottoman Empire is one of silence, shadows, and suffering. Their lives were carved by the blade of castration, shattered through rituals of humiliation, extinguished in secret executions, or stretched into endless years of captivity. They were not remembered as individuals, but as symbols, living proof of the Sultan's ability to command not only armies and nations, but the most intimate depths of human existence. History rarely records their names. Their voices were deliberately erased, their suffering hidden behind the empire's grandeur. The marble walls of Topkapi gleam in the sunlight today, visited by tourists who marvel at its beauty. But behind those walls linger ghosts, men who once danced, bled, and died in silence. Their story is not only about the cruelty of the past, it is about the dangers of power unchecked, of humanity stripped away in the service of control. If rulers could erase lives so easily in the name of authority, then what prevents it from happening again today? Their names are lost, but their silence remains. Which of these fates shocked you the most? And do you believe history remembers the victims, or only the rulers who silenced them?